Hi guys, and welcome to another brand new video. For those of you who don't remember, I used to be your hyphist and was one of the leading voices in the intellectual renaissance known as Malazan. As some of you know, a combination of pandemic related lockdowns and the fact that I started my PhD this year has made me disappear from both this channel and my second channel, 7 Minute Lectures. And while there's no guarantee that I'm ready to start posting content regularly again, I figure I might as well just put something out there. So, to all my loyal subscribers, especially the handful who've been missing me, I have one message for you. Your long wait is over. Purgatory is done and redemption is at hand, guys. The gates, the pearly gates of paradise are about to swing open because Ruth and Bad is here with a juicy new video. So buckle up and enjoy this juicy topic. Let me pull up my notes and get it started. As always, thank you to Steven Erickson for sharing and almost commenting on my last video. Today's topic is something I've spoken about here and there in bits and pieces before, but I haven't done anything specific on it. So here it is. The use of children in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So let me clarify something. We can use the word children in two contexts. We could use it to describe descendants, both literally and metaphorically. So literally, envy and spite are literally the children of Draconis. Ulshan Pral is literally the child of Kilava and Onrak. And you also find the word children being used metaphorically, where the followers are the children of a certain god, or the Teist Andi are the children of Mother Dark. Malas tubers are the children of Ishka Jarak. So it can be metaphorical as well. So that's one way in which the word can be interpreted. The second is to sort of use the word children to denote little kids. And this latter part is what this video is about. Steven Erickson's portrayal of children, of young kids, and the role that it plays in the series. Erickson often uses the child gimmick for a number of purposes. So, for example, one would be to create plot twists towards the end. Towards the end of Memories of Ice, for instance, we find out that the little Jagu child at the beginning was actually the Paniensia who's grown up. At the end of Toll the Hounds, we see that Mother Dark was the little child that was traveling around with Nimander's group. So there's stuff like that. Erickson also gives us tidbits of the childhood of particular important characters to flesh them out a little more and to make this mirror their adult selves. So, for instance, Tavo is said to have been really good at battle simulations as a kid, and she would have all her toys lined up in battle positions and plan things out even then. Quick Ben was said to have been obsessed with playing with dolls, at least according to his supposed sister. And this is not just a reference to his manipulative skills as an adult, but also his very first appearance where he literally turns Hairlock into a doll. Tehol is said to have been extremely resourceful and clever as a kid, where the family owed money to a lender, and then Tehol, in the space of a conversation, not only convinced the lender that they didn't owe him money anymore, but that the lender should now be working for him. We have Stormy and Gessler, who are said to have been extremely reckless in their youth, and they even talk about scaling dangerous cliffs when they were younger, which is then almost referenced in their race up top the spire against the Folklore Sail. So he does a lot of stuff like this, where we get bits and pieces about a character's childhood, and this kind of reflects on their adult selves. However, when it comes to the actual portrayal of children itself, Erickson usually goes a completely different route. The children of the 10 big books, as we all know, are usually not normal kids. There's usually something off about them, something which makes them extraordinary, I mean, scary, but extraordinary. And yet, Erickson also has this great ability to infuse the innocence of a child into these characters, where even when these kids seem bizarre or scary or creepy or just downright terrifying, there's still this tangible childlike quality to them. So let's run through some of these characters for me to demonstrate what I mean. Silver Fox is a character I've discussed before, and many others have as well. But she's a good starting point nonetheless because she personifies almost every Malazan child character. Weird, powerful, unfathomable, but a child nonetheless. Many have pointed out that her story could be a metaphor for the parasitic relationship between a child and a parent. I've pointed out that to me, she kind of symbolizes the loss of innocence of the Chilanai Mas, and narrative layers like this are what makes these characters interesting. There's a great video about Malazan mothers on Quick Jen's channel with her counselor and Ben, where they discuss Silver Fox quite a lot, and anyone interested in this character should check that excellent video out. Another good example is Kettle, a sweet girl, but we all know that something's off with her. Go back and read some of the earlier passages, especially with Bug, and even later on some of the scenes with the people that she travels with in Reaper's Gale. Throughout those scenes, you're torn between finding her adorable, but also feeling the strange sense of unease, sort of in the pit of your stomach, that there's something far more sinister and creepy about this girl than what we could possibly imagine. Of course, this sense of unease is ultimately what makes her murder even sadder. That despite all the bizarreness and the mystique surrounding the character, she was still a vulnerable little girl that we sympathize with, who could get her throat slit at any time in this cruel world. And that's exactly what happened to her. On the opposite side of the spectrum, where Erickson does the inverse, is the child called Panic, who sees the demon Apt as his mother. With him, the problem isn't that what he says is creepy, it's that his physical appearance is creepy, right? He has a raspy voice, he has two eyes fused into one giant eye, he's always perched on a demon's neck. So here you encounter the same problem as Kettle, but the mirror version, so to speak, where the kid's personality isn't creepy, but the aesthetics are. And once again, this adds to the emotional punch of the children being used as child soldiers because they're just a bunch of kids. There might be this undead army of kids raised to fight for the throne of shadow, but ultimately they're just kids. Just as how Malik Rel had them all crucified for his political gain when those kids were a part of the chain of dogs, Shadow Throne used them as child soldiers for his own political gain as well. So in a way, it's an accurate depiction of the real world as well, where children get murdered by both the supposed good guys and the supposed bad guys. For more on Apt and Panic, check out Ishka's video on Apt. A completely different type of creepy is Sin, and to a certain extent, Grub as well. Sin plays a huge role, obviously, in the climax of the series. With Sin, though, she's creepy because we know everything we need to about her. Contrast this with my previous examples. Silver Fox, Kettle, Panic. A big part of what made them unsettling was the mystery surrounding them. With Sin, we know she's powerful, we know she's destructive, we know she's losing her sanity, and that's what frightens us. There's no mystery there. It's terrifying because we see precisely what she's capable of. So, on the one side, we have children who frighten us because we know nothing about them, and on the other, we have kids who terrify the shit out of us because we know everything that we need to about them. Grub is interesting because he's creepy despite having none of the faults of the previous characters that I mentioned. He's a good kid, he's friendly, he's kind, he knows a lot of stuff, he helps the protagonist at crucial times. But this perfection makes him creepy, and everyone around him is creeped out as well. Even the bone hunters who laugh at death are kind of freaked out by him. There's an interesting passage in Deadhouse Gates, which says that Grub would go on to become the future First Sword. So we already know that he's destined for great things very early on in the series. He never seems to get physically tired. He knows a lot of shit that he really shouldn't. And for some reason, even this blazing ball of fury called Sin, for some reason, even Sin talks to him and she seems to trust him. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on with with Grub. And yet, there's a kid whom even Sin and Grub freak out about, and that's Baden. The story in general of the refugee kids in the desert, the snake, that's something which was really tedious for me during my first reading experience. But my appreciation for that storyline has expanded tremendously during my sort of rereading experiences. There's something very tangible about the suffering which kind of magnifies each new time you read that journey. And it's a stark reminder that ultimately all these children are the way they are because of the suffering and trauma that's been inflicted on them. And I guess that's the point. It's one thing for us to be lighthearted about it and call them creepy, but they all have gruesome and tragic tales behind them. Silver Fox is the way she is because she's forced into becoming the first flesh and blood bone caster in 300,000 years. Panic is the way he is because he was one of the children brutally crucified in the chain of dogs, and magic was then used to twist his body and keep him alive. Sin is the way she is because of the abuse that she was subjected to. Badel reached this really terrifying level of power because of the trauma of the march through the glass desert and the resilience that it created in the spirit of all these children. So, this theme of children suffering isn't just a type of tokenistic treatment. Neither is it done in an exploitative way. These are all children who suffer from very different kinds of trauma and suffering, and each of these challenges mirror real life issues as well. All of this, though, brings me to my favorite child character in the entire series. And if you have good taste, this would be your favorite child character as well. Harlow. Harlow is one of Erickson's greatest creations, precisely because he's a contrast to all this. All these kids that I've mentioned so far are terrifyingly powerful. Even the relatively normal ones that I haven't mentioned, like Nil and Nether, who are 10 or 11 when the story starts, even they are terrifyingly powerful despite being relatively normal personality wise. All these kids are fascinating characters, but they are not particularly relatable as children. And this is where the character of Harlow really triumphs. Harlow is just a kid. He can't use warrants. He isn't powerful. He isn't even competent. He's just a little kid. And the innocence and charm of that character is as big an achievement as the scope of the Malazan world itself. And there again is one of the trademarks that we as a fan base have come to appreciate. Erickson's ability to not just create this massive canvas, but to then populate it with unforgettable characters as well. Harlow, poor thing, has no idea what a nasty and cruel place the world is. He's done nothing wrong, and yet he has nobody. He's simply too young and pure and wholesome to understand just what a horrifying situation he's stuck in. His mother, Stani Minakis, was raped in Memories of Ice, so she resents him externally, even though her actual emotions are a lot more complex than that. The caretaking family doesn't particularly care about Harlow, and the kid whom they have, Snell, brutally beats him up and leaves him for dead. Snell, by the way, is on the Malik Rail spectrum of likability. He's then rescued, but the same family that rescues him sells him into slavery. He then has to go on the run and is pursued. The guy who owns the mine hates him. The local bully in the mine hates him, and he has to keep running. And the only person who's willing to help him, Binisk, dies. There's a really sad scene where Binisk is dying, and Harlow's like, Darujistan's right there, get up, let's go, we can make it. Because Binisk has always dreamed of seeing the lights of Darujistan one day. He was born in that slave mine, and he's never been out of it. So he's always wanted to see this glorious city. And he dies just before he could see it, and Harlow has to leave him behind and run for his life. And towards the end, Harlow is even forced to smash a rock over Venas's head to save Belennom, potentially committing murder in the process. And yet none of this dampens Harlow's innocence. None of it hardens him like it seems to harden other Malazan characters. And this is why Harlow is so special. He remains the same kid despite all the trauma. And I thought that was a great decision narratively. Because while it's certainly true that most people who undergo a harrowing experience find it changing their personalities forever, It's also true that many people who go through horrifying children as kids, they manage to survive it, they manage to get through it, they manage to come out of it without it having made them cynical or melancholic or hardened or whatever. And it was an even better decision by Erikson to give Harlow a happy ending, especially in a book like Toll the Hounds, which is basically one big epic grand tragedy. Of all the characters in the series who deserved a happy ending, Harlow deserved it the most. And it was nice to see it wrapped up so well where, number one, he makes it back safely, but number two, more importantly, his mother now accepts him. The entire Harlow subplot has very little to do plot wise with the other storyline threads, but it's such a fascinating story within that story. As we all know, the 10 big books have many fantastic single book characters where they just appear in one book and make an unforgettable impact. Itkovian in Memories of Ice, Beak in Reaper's Gale. Who else? My God, Coltane in Deadhouse Gates. There are so many of them, and I would put Harlow right up there with Itkovian and Beak and Coltane. He might not be as tragic and larger than life as those guys, but as a literary creation, Harlow is a spectacular character, one of the most likable and endearing characters in epic and grimdark fantasy. Or if you don't like the term grimdark for Malazan, let's just say fantasy of the grim and dark variety, right? Harlow is one of the most wholesome characters that can be created in the fantasy genre of the grim and dark variety. Let's put it that way. That sounds better. So in terms of the video, I think that's about it. The reason I want to make this is because there have been many discussions about suffering and children in general when we look at the Malazan books, right from the issue of underage and forced female circumcision with a young character like Felicin the Younger, not to mention all the stuff with Felicin the Older. Right from there, all the way up to the final books where we see the brutality of the glass desert and the baby held dies in Badel's arms. The overarching themes of suffering are quite obvious, but it's only when we look at these individual characters that we start to see just how much of a variety there is among all these characters and how unique they all are. We shouldn't underestimate these kids either, because that's what all the adults in the book do, and they end up paying the price for it. The folklore sale underestimate the children marching through the glass desert. They think the kids will just drop dead any time now, but the kids never do. Kilava underestimates the Jagu children, and one of them grows into the Panian seer. The Malazans underestimate just how dangerous sin can be, and despite them overcoming all these impossible odds, she turned out to be the unpredictable wild card for them in the end. The Tilanaimas underestimate Silver Fox, and they think she would just release them from their oath, but she refuses. Stony underestimates just how important Harlow is to her life and doesn't realize it until he's gone. There's even a scene where Tashran tells Shadowthrone not to underestimate Nil and Nether. So going by all that, we as Malazan adults shouldn't underestimate these kids either, or their importance to the story. None of them are tokenistic characters who've just been thrown in there because Erikson needs a kid in a scene to create an emotional impact. We've seen movies and read books where they play this trick, right? Where they need to introduce some tension into the story. So the villain grabs a child hostage, or the safety of some child is in danger, to make us as the audience get more involved in it. But there isn't any of that cheap stuff here. They all have a role, and they all have their own distinct identities and storylines. So I suppose that's about it, guys. I think we've looked at most of the kids in the series. I hope you enjoyed that and found it somewhat interesting at the very least. Hopefully this is a triumphant return, and hopefully I can get Ishka and Quick Gen to start posting again. They horribly betrayed me by doing the Bone Hunters collab without me, so maybe I can guilt them into posting new videos. Cal and I had planned a collab a while ago, so hopefully that takes off as well. Someone needs to seduce Raph away from Discworld and bring him back into the embrace of Malazan. Who else is missing? I probably need to defame Rake a bit more to get Counselor to start posting Malazan stuff again. Graceless is probably in some state-of-the-art high-tech lab working on maps for his next video, right? Someone said Niflrock went missing. Maybe he's back, but if he isn't, we've got to send an expedition to retrieve him as well. So there's a lot of work to do. in terms of Malastube. Of all the people who finished all 10 books, I think Philip and AP might be the last two men standing. They still do. Wait. Let me rephrase that. I think Dr. Chase and Dr. Canavan are the last two men standing. Now that I'm doing a PhD myself, I have a new level of appreciation for anyone else who has to go through this tedious process. So I should address them with titles worthy of that effort. Dr. Chase and Dr. Canavan are like the two. Remember the two Segule guys in Memories of Ice, Turul and Sinu? Remember the scene at the end where it's just the two of them fighting against this Kachen Shamal horde? That's basically Philip and AP right now. And just as with that battlefield, we need a quick bend to tip the scales and even the sort of the battle, so to speak. Will I be the quick bend that sees this through the end and revitalizes Malastube? Or will I be Baukalane and just leave in the middle of things when I get bored? Only time will tell. But until then, guys, take care and see you soon.